Hello, this is Dr. Mike, and this is our first session together in the Colonial History 312 class. And so I want to kind of give you something of my perspective. Sometimes perspective kind of helps us to understand better what we're talking about in history. And so I wanted to share with you some of the things that I've learned through the years in studying this wonderful subject that we have before us. We realize that we don't always get all those things in high school. Our history in high school is much more what Benjamin Franklin called a civic history. It is a story or narrative about how we won the country and all those things. And so there's a lot of things that are left out of that. You don't have a lot of story about Native Americans. You don't have a lot of story about African Americans, Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, and the part that they played. And you have a lot about women's history. And that's why today we have what we call micro histories. But you can go to the university and study any of these small history segments and learn more about them. I teach Native American history for a school. I very much enjoy that since I have some Native American ancestry, and I'm really proud to be able to contribute to my students in that way. But we're going to go back and look at what was going on in Europe just prior to the giant migrations. It probably wasn't correctly an immigration, even though that's the term we would use today, because we have people here and they come and join us. Migrations normally around the same country, but in these early days, there were Native Americans here, but there weren't any other Europeans. So I'm not sure which word you would prefer to use with that, but it is something of interest. One of the things that we want to think about is that we have to put on the lens of the time that we're studying. You cannot look back through your lens at these periods in the 14, 15, 1600s and understand them correctly unless you have on the lens of the time. That's one of the great mistakes that we make sometimes as historians, is trying to judge people based on our standards, our ideas, our beliefs, and you just can't do that because it's two different worlds. There was a lot of calamity in what we now call Europe in these areas from 1200, 13, 1400, a lot of wars, but also a lot of disease. The plague was wreaking havoc, and you and I can relate to that because we have seen the havoc that COVID has brought to our own world, and we have over 800,000 people dead in the United States alone. And so we understand something of what the people were going through. You realize there was no germ theory, there was no sense of anything that was going on of a medical nature. You don't have germ theory until 1860, so it's well into the future. So the only way they could understand or make sense of these calamities would have been that it was the hand of God and the will of God, and that you prayed and did your best, and that God was reaching out to strike you. It was funny, years later when Benjamin Franklin invented the lightning rod to prevent lightning from destroying buildings, that he was roundly criticized by religious folks because they saw lightning and thunder as the way God reached out to punish someone who had sinned or erred. And so in some way, Franklin with his lightning rod was standing in the way of the hand of God. Well, there's a lot of those kind of things. Germ theory met the same issue with we think we have problems with vaccinations. When smallpox vaccinations came out, it was an uproar among mainly Christian people that you're taking God's work into your hands and trying to prevent it. And no matter what we learned, we weren't supposed to use science and things of that nature to try to prevent it. And we see some of that still resonating in our society today. People that don't like vaccines, they don't wear a mask, they're going to put their hands in the hand of God. But at the same time, God gives you common sense to do the things that he's given you to. It's kind of like the guy who was in the middle of a flood, and he was up on his roof, and he was waiting for God to rescue him, and a boat come by and he refused to get in. The helicopter came by and he refused to get in, and finally the guy drowned and floated away in the house and drowned, got to heaven. He said, God, why didn't you rescue me? He said, I sent you a boat and a helicopter, and you wouldn't get on either one. I don't know what else I could do. That's very much the way it is with us. When God gives us the tools that we need, we also need to take advantage of those tools. There was climate change in these early days in Europe, and was one of the ways that people made them want to move to better climate. At the time of the first discovery, and that's kind of what we call Columbus's venture in 1492. Of course, we know it wasn't the first time Americas had been discovered. There were Native Americans that had been there for generations, the Vikings, the Russians, all manner of groups had discovered the planet, but they never are the North American continent, but they had not taken the time to explore or do anything much with it. But Europe was in turmoil. There was a large shortage of food, mainly because of this climate, this cold mini ice age that had come about, and there's going to be a few names. We don't hear much about that. Interestingly enough, this is the first introductory history class that I've ever covered this subject because it's just not included. But there was climate change. There was tremendous cold. In fact, we have stories of them holding ice carnivals on the Thames River in London because the river was frozen solid and people could skate on it and they could do, all kinds of things. And so they had these tremendous ice fairs and entertainment for folks, but it was bitterly cold. And there wasn't really a great deal of fuel for heat because there was a shortage of trees. When Columbus came to America, he had to jump through hoops in order to borrow 3 ships. And even the owners of those ships went on the voyage to protect their investment because wood was such a precious commodity. Europe and other areas of, or England and other areas of Europe were actually burning animal dung to try to heat their homes. But that was the situation when these peoples began to populate America. And of course, Spanish population or Spanish settlement is a little bit different from French. The English is the one that we'll mainly be centering on in this class. But when they came to the New World, it's extremely bitter cold. In fact, one writer has proposed that the average temperature in the house of one of the pilgrims at Plymouth or the Puritans at Boston would be about 45 degrees. That would be about the best it got because you're using a fireplace kind of structure. They don't have heaters. They don't have anything that we have. So if you don't like it cold, you would be much in danger of getting cold. I mean, so many people died from cold and illness and exposure that from the pilgrims, almost 40-50% of their population died the first year they were in the New World from disease and from things that came along with that. Having said that, back in Europe, where they had the Black Death in 12 and 1300s, this unseasonable mini ice age may have been their salvation because we think that it was partially the reason why the Black Death went away, that the cold weather stopped it. And we hear discussions of that with COVID. So we understand that, this is maybe the ice age was the hand of God to knock down the diseases that were killing the population at that time. And now we're facing climatic change. But let me encourage you as a believer or not, don't bury your head in the sand. It tends to be that Christians all too often refuse to accept science. There's a gigantic war between science and the Bible that started in the 1800s. I actually research and write about that. I'm writing a biography of a man, Charles Towns, who was from my town in Greenville, South Carolina, who in his latter years, on his way to 100, he had won the Nobel Prize in 1964 for discovering the laser, but he spent the latter part of his life in this debate of trying to renew the relationship between science and religion that had been fractured by Darwin and Lyell in the 1800s. So try to be open to truth. I mean, there's all kinds of truth. We realize there's Bible truth and we don't debate that very much. We do need to not park our brains at the door, be it the church house or the schoolhouse, and ask questions and be sure that we understand what we're talking about. So many people that we hear on TV these days that usually represent Christianity haven't really researched the subject that they're talking about. And so they just, as my grandmother would say, knock their brain out of gear and let their mouth idle. And that's a dangerous position to be in. So you ought to want to learn about these things and learn the impact they had on these early people as they migrated to the New World. They saw the New World as the hand of God opening a door for them to move into places that would be better for them. And so there was still a lot of that. There will be that mindset up until the 1800s with the Enlightenment. But it's all right. We all know that the hand of God works in our lives and leads us to places and brings about different results. But it was just as cold in the New World as it was in the Old. And they had to learn to live with that and to put up buildings and things to try to stay warm. And the fact that you survived that and was able to be there the next season to plant crops and raise your children would have certainly been a major asset. So as you read this week about this part of our history, realize that this is a piece of history that you won't get many places. And so you'll get to enjoy your something rather unique and learning. I'm more than happy to answer questions. I do encourage you to feedback and write to me and communicate with me. You have my number, you have my email. We have a place in the discussions where you can pose questions, and I'll do my best to answer them as clearly as I can. If I don't know the answer, I will certainly tell you that, and then I'll look for an answer. So let's have a great period together as we study some great history, and I look forward to our time together. Thank you.